student in the Communication and Journalism department, and I'm doing my master's in Media Studies. So, enough talking about me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And I was going to start by talking a little bit about myself, because the title of the talk is Jihad on Jihad. And yes, my name is Jihad. And for the media studies people, headlines for tomorrow's paper, New Mexico welcomes jihad. All right, so, all right. So I'm an Arizona kid, American kid from Arizona. My mom actually is from Oklahoma, and my father is from Jerusalem. So my mom's from the Midwest and my dad's from the Mideast. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s in Arizona, and jihad was just not a common name. And there wasn't a lot of diversity in Phoenix, where I grew up. You were either black, white, or Mexican. And so people just assumed jihad was some kind of exotic Mexican name. Maybe it was Oaxacan or something, right? Jihad. So my teammates playing soccer, they called me, I remember they started calling me Jay. And in fact, when the roster came out, my name was spelled J-A-Y Turk. And it was passed out to the parents. And my dad, I remember he was like disappointed, and he crossed out J-A-Y Turk and he wrote J-I-H-A-D, and he made dittos, for those who remember what ditto is. You know what I'm talking about. It's like a photocopy. All right, and then he faxed it over. You guys remember? No, I'm just kidding. And then he passed it out to the rest of the parents on the sidelines one of the games, and I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9. And I was like, Dad, what are you doing? You're embarrassing me. He goes, no, your name, I chose that name for you. It has a great meaning. It's the struggle to do the right thing. And it might be unusual or hard to pronounce, but it's worth the extra effort. So, so I've always gone by jihad ever since then. And it was never a problem. I was 8th grade, president of my 8th grade class. I was homecoming king my senior year in high school. And, it was never an issue for me. And I remember actually in the late 80s, there was, or mid to late 80s, there was this attack on the Marine barracks in southern Lebanon. And it was carried out by a group that called themselves Islamic Jihad. And I remember, because my dad always watched international news at home. And so I saw that on the news, and I was, this young kid, and I think he was middle school or high school. And I remember being petrified, first of all, saddened by the death of our Marines, but then also like thinking, what this is going to, I'm going to get harassed at school now. And, I remember being very nervous, and then going to school the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, and no one ever mentioned it, and no one ever, I guess, growing up in Arizona, it was, maybe I was glad that my fellow Americans are blissfully ignorant of the rest of the world. But it never became an issue, and so that was kind of almost my generation's 9/11. And then when I was in high school, my later years, I began asking, because my mom's Christian, my dad's Muslim. I began asking spiritual questions just for my own, as part of growing up, and maybe I had a foot in each tradition. It gave me license to explore both backgrounds, both faiths, but I began to explore Islam and Christianity and read books of history and philosophy, etc. And I was trying to figure out what I should do with my life as I was preparing to go to college. And I remember asking my father, what should I study in college? And he said, son, it doesn't matter what you study. You're Palestinian. You're going to go into business. So he wasn't much help in assisting me in making a choice. So, I kind of looked around, read the tea leaves, and decided to go into science and engineering, et cetera. So I started out my freshman year in science and engineering, but my heart was still asking those questions, and I was trying to, for my elective courses, take something about Islam or Islamic history, or to figure out more. There was, in the late 80s, there wasn't a lot in English. Now there's a ton, but at that time there wasn't a lot of information available in English, and so I was a little bit frustrated trying to learn more about Islam, and so I I tried taking a course on Islam. There was one at Arizona State University where I went my freshman year, and it was taught by someone who, to put it mildly, did not like Islam. So it was kind of an awkward, you know, as someone who was considering, you know, in my identity leaning in that direction, it wasn't a comfortable environment. And then I thought, well, let me look at some other classes. There's the, you know, Islamic history. There's, you know, there's a long Islamic civilization that was played a major role in world history. No courses on that. So I said, okay, well, Muslims, Andalusian Spain, right? So I went to take a course on the history of Spain, and you know, I looked at the course description, starts in 1492, which is the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but also the year that the Moors and the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And so Isabel and Ferdinand got married, and so that ended the Muslim presence in the peninsula, Iberian Peninsula. Philosophy, moral philosophy. I said, well, there are famous Muslim philosophers, so I took a history of moral philosophy, and you know, we started with the classics of you know, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, etc. Went through the Middle Ages, skipping over all of the Muslim philosophers. We looked at Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and others, but no Muslim philosopher was referenced, which was somewhat ironic because philosophy was preserved for the West by the Muslim philosophers who then reintroduced it through Spain and Italy and other places. But, so it was a little bit frustrating. It was a great class though. I really enjoyed that class. But, so anyway, I just was finding myself struggling to get more information, and I would hear things at the mosque by people who were immigrant students from the Gulf of Arabia who, you know, they had an approach to the religion that just didn't resonate with me, but I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the language, I didn't have the background, the knowledge to challenge that. And so I decided to, during my freshman year, to apply for a scholarship to study Arabic and Islamic Studies at a seminary in Saudi Arabia, the Islamic University of Medina. So it was just kind of on a whim, and I applied, and I got the acceptance letter 2 weeks after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So, you know, I told my parents, I said, look, I got this acceptance letter, full ride scholarship to go and study Arabic and Islamic Studies in Medina. And this was, you know, you could predict what was going to happen. There was a run up to a big war, and they're like, you're going into a conflict zone. I said, listen, I really want to learn Arabic and do Islamic studies, but you know, it's going to be in this region. No one's going to attack Medina though. It's in a, you know, it's a kind of a sacred city. Saddam's not going to attack them. You know, the Saudis, you know, no one's going to attack. American forces aren't going to do anything. So I said, I'll feel safe. I'm just going to go there anyway. So I went there, war broke out, you know, in our winter break, and then we went back to our studies. But I was there during that time, and I was, you know, kind of focused on learning Arabic and doing, you know, it was kind of my walkabout. It was my spiritual journey, and I found something when I was able to actually access the Quran and read it with an American lens, you know, from the lens of who I was as a person, as opposed to all the cultural baggage that might come with, you know, Arab or Southeast Asian or other contexts. So I found something very beautiful, and then at the same time, you know, war is breaking out. So I said, well, what ultimately do I want to do with my life? It was, you know, so there were some other Americans that were studying there. They said, oh, we just want to move here. It's a very comfortable lifestyle, and, you know, very peaceful, and we can just, and I said, well, you know, it might be comfortable, but I want to do something with my life, and I don't think I can contribute anything here in Saudi Arabia. So I decided to, what I really wanted to do was go into academia so that I could offer those courses that I wanted to take when I was an undergrad. And so I said, I'm going to need to go, no offense to Arizona State University, but I need to go to finish my undergrad at another institution. So after a couple of years in Medina, I transferred to UC Berkeley and did my degree in Islamic history and the Arabic language. But knowing that I was going to go on to graduate school, I knew that I needed to know another Middle Eastern language, and so I learned so much more than just the language, having lived for that period of time in Medina, in Arabia, that I decided that the second language I would learn would be Farsi, and I would go, again, against the better judgment of anybody that I asked, I decided to go to Iran and learn Farsi. which I did, and I was able to. They didn't, we still don't have an embassy with Iran, so I had to get a visa through the interest section of another embassy. I got there and I studied Farsi at the University of Tehran and also in Qom. Learned Farsi, came back, finished up my undergrad, and then went on to graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin, where I did Islamic law, jurisprudence, also known as Sharia. Watch out, it's coming at you. No. So, that also can go in the headline. Jihad brings Sharia to New Mexico now. And then I came out to UCLA in '99 to do my doctoral degree in Islamic Studies there. And I was probably 6 or 7 years into my doctoral degree when I was approached to serve as the imam of the largest and oldest mosque in Los Angeles, the Islamic Center of Southern California. And I said, well, that's kind of a different trajectory than I'm on. But there's education involved there, and the community was very large and dynamic, and not only diverse internally, but also civically engaged, and had many institutions affiliated with it. So I thought, let me give it a try. So I started out there part-time. They liked me, I liked them. I became full-time, and then I really began to feel a sense of fulfillment in that role. And I put my PhD on the back burner. I was still teaching at UCLA as an adjunct and at a law school, and I taught a course also at USC, University of Southern California. And it was while I was there that I was approached by the president of a Christian seminary, 130-year-old Christian seminary, called Claremont School of Theology. It's a Methodist-based, my mom was Methodist-based seminary out in Claremont. Used to be affiliated with USC from 1902 to 1956 before moving out to Claremont. It's about 30 miles east of downtown LA, and became an ecumenical, meaning inter-Christian seminary. But the president came to me, he said, Jihad, I've been following what you've been doing, and I was recently brought on as president to reinvigorate this Christian seminary, because the trajectory of Christian seminary education in the United States is kind of going downhill, and they brought me on to try and revitalize this institution and raise the enrollment numbers, et cetera. And I've been working on it, and I have a vision. I have an idea how we might be able to do that. Somewhat revolutionary, but my goal is my vision is to desegregate theological education, to have every religious tradition study authentically their own tradition, but to do so shoulder to shoulder with people of other faith traditions, allowing through this consortium of seminaries the opportunity for three things to happen. Not only to learn about your own faith, number two is to learn about each other's faith, but number three is to also learn the skill set on how to interact, engage, collaborate, cooperate for the common good across religious tradition. In other words, to reclaim the role of religion to be a force for good and peacemaking, as opposed to be something that's invoked just to create conflict and division. I remember I was speaking once at UCLA, and someone said, it never occurred to me that religion could do something that's good in the world. I thought it was just there to divide people. So I thought this was a great idea, and I told President Jerry Campbell at the time, I said, there's one problem with your vision. Muslims Pew puts us at around 3 million in a recent survey. Other estimates put the number of Muslims in America at somewhere between 4 and 8 million. Regardless, we're between 1 and 3% of the population here in the United States. There's over 2,000 mosques, hundreds of Islamic schools, elementary schools for Muslim kids, many more Sunday schools, but there doesn't exist a single accredited Islamic seminary graduate level in the United States to educate our religious leaders and scholars. And so one of our faculty, there was a faculty member from Kentucky, actually, San Bagby, Professor Bagby, who did a study of mosques, and he, in his survey, discovered that only 44% of mosques, of the over 2,000 mosques in the United States, have a full-time imam, religious leader. And 93% of those imams were born, raised, and educated abroad. So the problem is with that is that, I mean, the good thing is they might have some authentic knowledge of the faith and practice. The problem is they have a very difficult time translating that knowledge in a way that's relevant to the plurality, the diversity of their own congregation, the youth, being inclusive of women, and be able, and they have a difficult time being able to be civically engaged. And so a lot of these mosques are somewhat insular, inward-looking, and just trying to keep afloat, serving the needs of the community with regards to religious ritual, the 5 daily prayers, the once-a-week congregational prayer, which happens on a Friday, offering Sunday school classes for young people to learn the basics of the faith, etc. So they don't really engage effectively like the Dialogue Institute does. Most of these institutions don't. Most of these mosques are just serving the needs of the community, and maybe not even effectively in doing that, given the background of the imams, because also imams back home, they just lead the prayer. They don't necessarily put on programming, and they're not necessarily trained and equipped to how to be leaders. So I said, we need an institution, and so I went ahead and spoke with the senior leadership at the Islamic Center of Southern California, and I said, I think we can create one. We should create one and partner with this institution. And they were on board with it, and I worked for a couple of years to make that happen. And President Campbell, he said, we'll help you out, because we're self-interested. We want to be more relevant in our Christian education to say, look, we're addressing some of the world's problems, and we're engaged in interfaith relations and peacemaking, et cetera. And so we want to succeed in this partnership, so we'll help you to succeed, because that helps us as well. And I said, how will you help us? He said, well, we'll help you with a little bit of covering the operational expenses for the first couple of years. This was in 2010. I said, wow, that's very generous. He said, there's more. I said, all right, tell me. He said, we can, in addition to that, we can share with you all of our infrastructure and our administration, our library, our student information system, our recruitment office, our payroll, CFO, all of that stuff, the offices, facility, campus. I said, wow, that's awesome. He said, one last thing, and that's best of all. We can give you accreditation. And I said, how would you give us accreditation? Accreditation is usually something that a regional accrediting body does. He said, well, I'm a commissioner in the regional accrediting body, and I know the bylaws very well. And one of the bylaws allows for an established accredited institution to incubate a new institution. And we would be happy to incubate you without dictating what it is that you, as an Islamic seminary, teach. We'll be very deferential and respectful. We want you to be authentically you. And so it was kind of the best of all worlds. And so we went ahead and launched the program in 2010. We named the institution Bayan Claremont, and Bayan means clear, coherent speech, reflecting clear, coherent thinking. So that's kind of what we're about, is clarity of vision and spirit. And also it's easy to say. It doesn't have a lot of ayns or khas in there. So it's an Arabic or Quranic expression. But so we launched, and our first degree was in Islamic Studies and Leadership. It's an academic degree in Islamic Studies and Leadership. So our goal was to either retrain or re-educate those who are serving as imams who came from other countries, or to also provide a pathway for American Muslims to rise in their ability to serve the American Muslim community as religious leaders and scholars and imams. And we have both men and women in our program, and men and women in our faculty. One last thing I'll say about the institution, and I go into this at some length because I wanted to share, because the idea was jihad on jihad. So that's about me as jihad, and then I'm going to talk about jihad as a concept, and then ISIS, and I'm going to say some very specific things about religion, al-Qaeda, ISIS, extremism, etc., that might challenge some of you, and I welcome an engagement, so that part will be more interactive. So, given all of that, the part of what when I was doing my own graduate studies, one of the things that I was very interested in exploring is what went wrong? like, you know, I'm looking at the history and the beauty of Islamic civilization and how not only it preserved the Greek, you know, philosophy, but contributed to the advancement and development of science and art and culture and diversity and pluralism. And, you know, speaking of Spain, there was the convivencia where Muslims using Christians learned to cooperate and collaborate, and, you know, it wasn't all roses and candy, but it was, you know, it was for them, it was a lot better than alternative environments in the world at that time. And you know, even though there's a perception that Islam spread by the sword, I mean, the Islamic civilization did spread from China to Spain within 90 years of the death of Muhammad. However, those societies to which Islam spread, namely in the Christian world, namely, for example, North Africa, Egypt, and the Levant, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, those territories which were Christian remained majority Christian for over 400 years and still have about 10 to 15% Christian population till today. And it was a slow process. You know, 400 years, it wasn't a sharp break. It was just the demographic shift through conversion and through other factors led to the majority of the population slowly becoming Muslim. But the point that I'm making is that you know, I you know, had studied the history in the golden era, if you will, and I found, just in terms of my own spiritual journey, something beautiful. But I look around, and what you associate with Islam today is not that. And so I was just trying to figure out, as part of my studies of Islamic history and Islamic theology and the Muslim world, what went wrong, and I found the answer. So that's what I was going to share with you today. So what I'm, as a person, as a religious leader, as a person that takes faith seriously, as someone who aspires to have faith influence us in a positive way to help us realize the potential that we have as human beings to be of good character, to be of high moral standards, to not only to be comfortable within ourselves, but allow that self-confidence that we have and the love for ourselves and our Lord to be expressed through how we deal with one another in a beautiful way. That's my aspiration and my hope. And that being said, my studies of history and sociology and anthropology have shown me or demonstrated to me or convinced me that most people in the world, regardless of their religious affiliation, are not most influenced by religion, but they're most influenced by other factors. Economics, culture is a big one, and so many other things. And in fact, what you see going on today in terms of the conflict is most influenced by these other factors, and I'm going to delineate them for you and suggest that religion is the most marginal of them, even though it's invoked in the most high profile in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of actually what's behind what's going on. It's anything but religion. And I hope to convince you of that in the next few minutes. Before the 1500s, the world was really divided into a world of empires. You had the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. You had, well, it came a little bit later, but you know, the world was empire. You had, you know, the Sasanian, the Persian Empire. You had the Asian empires as well, China, etc. So you had these large empires that were characterized by being, you know, covering a large territory whose population was multilinguistic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and you know, generally very diverse with different histories, etc. And so what happened was, really starting around the 1500s, there was a shift from a world of empires to a world of nation states. And nation states are very different, because a nation state generally, and Foucault would suggest that there are 5 characteristics that constitute a modern nationalist identity. Nation states tend to coalesce around, and there are a lot of wars that happen between the time of empires to the time of nation states, but these populations tended to coalesce around monolithic national narratives, where there was monolithic narrative surrounding issues of history, attachment to a particular piece of land, culture, language, and yes, religion. And if you look at all of the nation states around the world, but let's look at Europe first because that's where this movement started, you see that they're pretty monolithic for the most part. I mean, looking back when they were first formed, maybe not as much today, but in Germany, they're German. They speak German, and they have these Germanic tribes, etc., that they look to as their ancestry. They have the homeland there, and there's this particular culture, and there's a heritage, if you will. There's a national narrative. And usually part of the history is some kind of glorious past, this part of the narrative of what it means to be a nation state. We had this grand, great history, glorified history. You can look at a number of the European states that have these more or less monolithic nationalist narratives, and they're split. The French are very French. We're French and, Catholic, and, we have this grand history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Food is oftentimes a part of that because it's culture. Turkey is another example. Part of it's in Europe, at least, and part in Asia. But Turkey is another example. It used to be an empire and had the millet system with multiple religious traditions and ethnic groups and linguistic groups, et cetera, over a vast territory. Slowly, the empire was chipped away at through a conflict with Europe. And the Arabs, if you remember Lawrence of Arabia, right? The Arabs in World War I sided with the Allies. Turkey was kind of shrunken down to Asia Minor. At one time, Turkey had more Christians under their control in Europe than they did Muslims. So it was a very broad empire. What happened was in World War I, under Ataturk, Turkey then shifted and became, instead of an empire, it became a modern national state in every definition of that term. So no longer were they multi-linguistic, multi-religious, multi-ethnic. They became decidedly a modern nation state. And that's why Ataturk made as his slogan, Ne mutlu Türk'üm diyene, which means I am proud to be a Turk. Right? And my name is Turk, but I'm actually not Turkish, so I'm not speaking from personal heritage. But there was this nationalist narrative. What did that result in? Well, it resulted in not only in the expulsion of the Armenians and the mass killing of the Armenians, which happened even before World War I exactly, but it was part of that transition to a nationalist identity where it became more monolithic, but also, and this is important to keep in mind, also the Kurds, who were also Sunni Muslim, were ostracized because they had their own territory to the east, they had their own language, their own culture, their own history, and in a world of nation states, they should be their own nation. But when Sykes and Picot, the French and British guy who divided up the world that the French and the British conquered, they decided not to give the Kurds a homeland. So the Kurds now exist in Iraq and in Syria and in Turkey and in Iran, and in Iraq. So they, you have the Kurds that were kind of divided between all these countries, and guess what? They've been fighting ever since then for their autonomy. In fact, if you look at every conflict around the world, every major conflict, you can tie it to competing national narratives within a border. So let's take this outside the Muslim context and then inside the Muslim context. Let's start with the Basques. Now, the Basques recently, kind of conceded. The Basques are in Spain, in the Pyrenees, in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula. Now, the Basques have been using terrorism to try, and other means, to try and break off and form their own country. They said, we are Basque. We speak Basque. We have our own history, our own territory, the Pyrenees, our own culture. We're distinct in every way, except that we're all Catholic. All right? So they shared the same religion, but they used terrorism to blow stuff up, to try and whatever, in order to form their own country. Northern Ireland, they are Irish. They have the same history, the same language. Everything's the same. Same culture, except religion here is different. And so now the Catholics and the Protestants are vying for control of the state narrative, right? And the state as an instrument is a very powerful thing because it affects economics, it affects, you know, so much about one's pride and identity and position and the us versus them. And so the division, the national narrative between the Northern Irish folks was, the fault line was religion there. But let's take, you look at Rwanda, 1 million people died. Who was fighting whom? We had the Tutsis and the Hutus. 1 million people died. To us, they all look like black Africans, but for them, they were different tribes. They were different tribes, and so they were vying for state control, and so it became very, very, very ugly. And so, you know, you look at any conflict around the world, and almost every single one can be tied to these competing national narratives and control of the state. Look at Iraq now. Let's go into the heart of the matter. And now we're transitioning to speak more specifically about Al-Qaeda, about ISIS and other related things. Now, if I were to ask you, who were the three major groups before ISIS came about? Who were the three major groups that were struggling and fighting against each other in Iraq? You had the Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds. So the Shiites are what religion? Shiite Muslim. The Sunnis are what religion? Sunni Muslim. The Kurds are what religion? Sunni Muslims. So really you have the Shiites versus the Sunnis versus the Sunnis. But we don't talk about it that way. Really what you have is the Kurds versus the Arabs versus the Arabs. Wait, that doesn't work either. Okay, so you have so how do you divide it up? Well, what you have is three competing national narratives, really over three different parts of Iraq where they predominate in terms of the demographics. And so you have three, and they used to be three different provinces under the Ottoman Empire that were put together when Sykes-Picot created the world. And so they were held together under the iron fist of this ruthless dictator, Saddam Hussein, and he tried, as the Soviet Union did and so many other large empires that became nation states that had to deal with this diversity, they tried to mix everyone around and impose a particular uniformity and unanimity of culture and ideas and history, etc. Chinese are doing it with Uyghurs and other potentially breakaway states and regions. You have also in China, you have where the Dalai Lama is from, in Tibet. You have separatist movements there, even Taiwan till today. So my point is this: the state wants to make everyone uniform, have the same language, have the same identity, the same narrative, and to allow that. And where the state is not successful, where there's a failed state, it means that the state wasn't able to rally all of the power of the state, the force of the state, the instruments of the state, which include education, media, and public discourse, wasn't able to rally the identity of the population successfully behind one national narrative. And so you have different separatist, different groups that oftentimes have different regions that are then either trying to break away or take over. Even like until today, in states that are not failed, like in Spain, you have separatist movements, like in Barcelona or Catalonia. I don't know if Barcelona is trying to break away, but they have a really good soccer team. But the point is that that you have and in the United States we have Texas, where I was last night or yesterday. But seriously, you look at Afghanistan, which was all these different tribes. They haven't really been unified for quite a while. They were always under occupation of this or that. And as soon as and I remember Rambo, Rambo 3 was it, where he went to Afghanistan and fought alongside the Mujahideen, and the Mujahideen were our friends back then because they were fighting against the Russians, and we kicked the Russians out, and then we kind of, I don't know if you saw, was it what's it, Wilson's War? Wilson's War. Charlie Wilson's War, thank you. Charlie Wilson's War, where we kind of, equipped them and helped them defeat the Russians and then kind of abandoned them. And then all the tribal differences came to a head because every tribe then wanted to control the state that had its clear borders, and things kind of fell apart again. All right, so my thesis is that the challenge is modern nationalism with certain state borders that in which these different groups are vying for state control. Adding to that mix, you have regional powers that play a less than helpful role in kind of fueling some of these division by, for example, adding this really flammable liquid to the fire. They put in weapons and money and sometimes their own military for their own self-interested regional interests. So, for example, Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil. Now, it just so happens that Saudi Arabia is decidedly Sunni, Wahhabi Muslim, right? Just so happens that the province that has the oil has the population that lives over that part of their country is Shiite. And so when the revolution happened in '79 with Iran, they became very fearful that region, the eastern region of Saudi Arabia where the oil is, would rebel, would revolt, would separate, would whatever, with the help of Iran, and would engage in their own revolution. And so they became not only very protective of their borders and very military, building up their military in order to do that, but ideologically, they tried to inoculate and insulate themselves from that by becoming very vehemently anti-Shiite. And the rhetoric was very puritanical. Wahhabism already kind of, as a theology, allowed for that, as it was a very narrow definition of what is authentically Muslim and who then you can excommunicate or call an infidel from amongst the Muslims, which, because as a Muslim you're not supposed to fight and kill another Muslim, and so no Muslims ever killed another Muslim. No. They say, well, you're not really a Muslim unless you believe these very narrow principles, and if you are Shiite or Sufi or something else, then we can rebel or fight or kill you, etc. And so that's kind of the rhetoric. It's kind of turned to that. And then, so they're fearful of that. Now, just to their north, their border to the north is Iraq. 60% of that population is Shiite. So when democracy comes, after we kick out Saddam Hussein, who's going to dominate are the Shiite. So they don't want an Arab Shiite state that would be very friendly to Iran and maybe hostile to them, or maybe friendly to the Shiites in their eastern border or eastern province. So support came from the Gulf in general to undermine, and it wasn't just Saudi Arabia, but UAE and Qatar, and Qatar to a lesser extent, but Qatar to some extent, and Kuwait, to support Sunni Arab resistance. Now the Kurds are also Sunni Muslims, but they have their own focus. They have a province to the north, has its own resources in oil. They just want their own land. So they're kind of like, we don't want to take over the Arab provinces. We just want to have our either autonomous or semi-autonomous region where we could finally have our own state and our own culture and our own land and our own national narrative. And so, this is really what's going on. Now, how is religion invoked? Well, religion is invoked because it is a very powerful force, and it's a moral force, and it's a force that can, when invoked, either convince people through the taking a moral stand that this is so bad that you have to fight and die for it, or using fear to say that your religion is under threat, your way of understanding religion is under threat, and so you have to defend it, and that's a moral and noble cause and a worthy cause that reaches to the point of you being willing to sacrifice your life. And so religion is a powerful force. Now, the way that it's able to be instrumentalized is in part because, number one, the schools of religion in the Middle East are state-controlled. And so the way that religion is taught and I was in Vienna 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, and on Friday I came back from Vienna, where I met with the heads of the Islamic seminaries and the Christian seminaries in the Arab-speaking world. So Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq. They were all there. Palestine. There was, it was actually put on by a Christian pastor, father from Bethlehem, Mitri Rihab, who's a good friend of mine. And so I was invited as the head of an Islamic seminary in the United States. And so we talked about how religion is instrumentalized, and the heads of those schools actually desire to, and they acknowledge, they said that part of the problem is our graduates are going on. So we need to, and they were open to reclaiming the role within their respective institutions. Some of them are very large, 50,000, 60,000, tens of thousands of students are coming through these schools, not all in religious studies from the Muslim side. The Christian seminaries are quite a bit smaller just because of the population of Christians in those areas. But they are starting to look at how religion is taught in their institutions and how they can play a more constructive role and counter some of the negative roles, some of the negative ways in which religion is being used by the state. And so that's part of the problem, is that the state. The other part of the problem is that the illiteracy rate in the Muslim world is so high. Even in a place like Egypt, 80 million people, 40% illiteracy rate. And it's higher in other places. Pakistan is similar. Pakistan has almost 200 million people there, with almost half are illiterate. So if you invoke religion, it's not like someone's going to go and double check the sources. They can't read, so they just kind of go along with the authoritative voice that they hear in a prominent way, publicly disseminated. And so part of the problem is illiteracy. There's also poverty and corruption at the state level. And so the self-interested governments that would freely instrumentalize religion for their own nefarious purposes. So all of that mix goes into a big pot, and what comes out is violence and terrorism and other things, and religion is invoked to justify it. I was, and I'll close with this, but I want to hear some questions. I was recently on a panel with Adam Schiff, who's the leading Democratic member of Congress on the House Intelligence Committee. So it was myself and Brian Jenkins, who's the head of RAND Corporation, which is a think tank based in Los Angeles or in Santa Monica, but a very well-respected national think tank. He's been their head of counterterrorism since 1971, the year I was born. He's a leading expert in counterterrorism. We were on an NPR program in Pasadena a few months ago dealing with the same topic. And it was a long format. It wasn't like a soundbite thing. We spoke for an hour and a half, all of us together, the panel. And Kelly McEvers from NPR, who has been on the ground for years in that region, was moderating. And I came last. And I was listening intently to how it is that they discussed the issue. Not one time, not once, was religion invoked by Adam Schiff, nor by Brian Jenkins. And when it came my turn, I said exactly what I shared with you now, this thesis that it has to do with modern nationalism and these regional politics, and Russia and the United States and are now getting involved in ways, or the United States has always been involved, but is escalating in some ways with boots on the ground. But Russia is becoming more involved, and there's other regional players, and oil and economics and tribalism and all these other factors. So I presented that, and both of them said, we agree fully. It's not about religion. So I don't know if that was what you were wanting to hear from me, but this is what I thought I would share. It's my perspective, but I'm open to being challenged on this, and I would love to hear any questions or thoughts you might have for the remaining 30 seconds that we have before we have to evacuate the room. Yes?
Do you agree with Malala that a major move in the right direction would be education, particularly women's education?
Yeah, so I screened her film months before it came out, and I took my 14-year-old son to see it as well. Phenomenal. I think she is exactly in the right track, and it is about education, and it is about empowering women, and it is about reclaiming, because one of the things that she does beautifully is she couches her message in her identity as a practicing Muslim girl. And it's part of what inspires her and animates her. She said, this is the true understanding of my faith. And those other people who try and invoke it are really misguided, and they have no foundation or basis in the faith. They just try and garb themselves in religion and being the morality police. But what they're doing is morally bankrupt and corrupt, and really trying to impose a chauvinistic and militant version of society on the rest of the people, invoking religion, but not doing so with any kind of foundation or basis. So I think her message is spot on.
One other quick question. Are any of your courses offered as MOOCs?
So we do have a YouTube channel that we put some of our stuff out there. It's not exactly a MOOC, a massive open online course. We are developing an extension program that will offer some courses not for credit through a MOOC format. That we'll roll that out next year. So that's in development. We do have a couple of courses that are fully online, but most of our courses you can enroll in as a non-degree seeking student. And we actually, the in-person portion is only 1 week. So the reason why it's 2 weeks a semester is because what we do is we stack 2 classes, 5 hours a day for 6 days in week 4 of the semester. So it'll be 10 hours of instruction a day for 6 days, 60 hours. And then week 5 of the semester, we do an additional 2 classes. So if you're a full-time enrolled student taking 4 classes, you'll be on campus 2 weeks a semester. But if you want to just come and take one and enjoy, beautiful Southern California weather in February when it's like 80 degrees and sunny and beautiful, you can do that for just 1 week and do the rest of the course online. And you can either do it for credit or just as an audit. Yes?
I'm wondering, connect to what you last said, if much of the issue isn't just the fact like a literacy issue, but also critical thinking in terms of education.
That's right. And so one of the things that we do as an institution, as a seminary, is and I studied at a seminary, so I know that it's just you memorize stuff, you don't really learn critical thinking skills. So that's one of the things, and I shared with all the heads of the seminaries in the Middle East, and some of them are very open and they're trying to introduce that. But it's just not part of the curriculum currently. We introduce critical thinking skills, and so there's nothing like this program in the world. And so what we're doing is, we have a global vision, and that's why I went ahead and went to Vienna, even though it's not the heart of what we're doing. We do want to try and make a dent and make an influence, make an impact on the way that Islam is being taught internationally.
Another question, so just kind of going on this argument that it's not just religion, maybe applying that historically, do you just say that could even apply to, like, say, how the Moors and Muslims were expelled from Spain, that it's pitched as it was religion, but if you think about it, you could argue it was almost predominantly political at the same time.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree that applies to the Crusades, that it applies to the Inquisition even, to any time in which religion was invoked. It's really the instrumentalizing of religion by a group in order to identify the us, the power base, versus the them, the one that's they're attempting to marginalize or disempower.
Do you feel like that also rings true for the Protestant Reformation?
So yeah, the Protestant Reformation, I think, fits perfectly into this paradigm, if you will, this thesis that I presented. In that, the Catholic Church at that time, and I think this is the last question, and we have to close, because I'm looking at a professor who has a glare through that window over there. So you had the church at that time was both the religious institution, but also the power. And the whole idea of the corruption of the church, the way that the church was exploiting and using indulgences, other things that were deemed oppressive or misuse of the power. So it became a power issue. And so the Reformation, or the Protestant Reformation, really was challenging the authority and the power of the church Yeah, I think it fits perfectly with this model.
Thanks.
All right, well, thank you very much for your invitation, and to the Dialogue Institute and the University of New Mexico.